Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar to all our prospective students who are interested in our new Level 6 top-up course, the Global Trade and Business BA. Today's talk is a joint lecture on the topic of global challenges facing business, and the question our panel will address today is: what are the biggest challenges facing business in our world today, in a world that's VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous? So I'd like to introduce the panel now, including the course leader, Dr. Helen Solomon, and so each of our speakers who all lecture on the Global Trade BA are going to present on 3 global challenges facing the business community in the world we live in today. And just to give you an idea that this is a very interdisciplinary course, they'll be coming at it from different perspectives. So Karen will give very much a trade and economic perspective. Helen will look at the financial and economic aspects, and Nodus will give a sociological and organizational and even an ecological perspective from the standpoint of climate change and sustainability and building resilience in a VUCA world. So yeah, at this point, I should explain the format of today's webinar. So there'll first be the presentation, a joint lecture on this topic, and then we'll open up to you, the audience, at the Q&A for a debate. If you wanted to ask about, had questions about the topic itself, or studying at Westminster Business School in London, or about the course itself, yeah, then feel free to post your questions to the Q&A box and any comments to the chat box. So without further delay, I'll hand over to Karen, and at the end of the session, I should mention, I'll also give a brief overview of the course and how to go about applying. And it's a level 6 course, entry course, and I'll explain more about what that is when it comes to that concluding section of this webinar. So yeah, it's over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Joe. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to see so many people joining us. So we thought it'd be nice to pick up on a topic which kind of picks up on themes that we're going to talk about on the course. And so we've been set this question, which is: what are the biggest challenges for facing businesses today? And as was suggested by Joe, I'm going to approach this as a trade economist, which I am, and I'm going to try and persuade you of what I think are the 3 most important challenges facing businesses today. And at the end of this, you'll get the opportunity to see who you are most persuaded by, and to see which of the challenges you think is in fact most pressing. So let's start with my first challenge. So I think that the first, Joe, if I could have the next slide, great, thanks. So I would argue that one of the most pressing challenges facing businesses today is the issue with supply chains. I think that quite a lot of you have probably identified this by simply going into the supermarket and seeing that there are some shelves that are blank. Or perhaps you've tried to go online and order the latest iPad or iPhone or Xbox and found that there's a delay in receiving it. So you've probably seen these delays in the supply chain. And why is it that I think that that is probably one of the most important challenges? Well, it's about the fundamental process of producing anything that we buy now. So if you were going back certainly 200 years ago, or even less far than that, most of the products you would buy would be produced in one country. This is now no longer the case. Almost everything we buy now is produced across multiple countries. So what does that mean? It means that we have to sort of make part of a product in different places across the world, and we have to ship it between places across the world. And we do usually ship it. So I've put a picture of a ship here on this slide. Why do we usually use ships? Well, it's the cheapest way to trade products. It's the lowest cost. It's not the quickest, but it's still the dominant way that we actually transport goods so that you receive what you buy in the shops or online. And definitely there's been a problem recently. So the problem, which is mentioned in this quote from the Financial Times headline in September, is that these global supply chains have been really struggling. Why? You might have heard about this and you might not be clear why that's the case. So essentially what's happened during COVID is that we've had an unusual situation where there's been a demand shock and a supply shock. So if you imagine this, in the early days in particular, there was a demand shock because many of us weren't going out to shops, couldn't go out to shops to buy things. And therefore, there just wasn't as much demand for certain products. There certainly wasn't demand for products like a lot of food that was being sold in restaurants because they weren't open. But also, it actually prevented a lot of people buying other things, especially because the online system of purchasing things wasn't as good as what it is now. Now, on the other side, people stopped going into the factories to work at various points during the COVID pandemic, and therefore it created supply issues. So we've had quite an unusual situation of demand shocks and supply shocks. And this has meant that it's become quite difficult to manage these supply chains in a very effective way. And you can imagine this creates a huge problem for businesses. Now, to finish on this challenge, I will say the following, that most people across the world believe that this is largely a short-term issue. So there haven't been changes in the way that ports operate, for example, to try and improve things. There hasn't been a desire on the west coast of the United States to automate those ports in the way that Rotterdam is. There hasn't been big investment plans for ports. Why? Because we believe that this is a short-term effect of the COVID pandemic. However, from the point of view of a country like the UK, where we've also had the other shock, which has been Brexit, I think a lot of people feel that, in fact, it's not short-term, and that's why you see a lot of money being put in to streamlining and automating a lot of the customs procedures, because they see that this is a really important issue for businesses. So that's my first challenge. The second one that I will try and persuade you on is that there is, in fact, a challenge of trade tensions. Now, I'm going to argue that some of this is not new, and some of it, however, is quite novel. So one thing I'll say at the start of this is that trade issues have become much more discussed around the dinner table for two main reasons. And people like me, trade economists, have become much more popular for these two reasons. One is President Trump definitely created much more of an everyday narrative around trade. He raised the profile. Second of all, Brexit has really raised the profile of trade generally. So it's a really good time for trade economists like me. We're probably the winners from this. But all of this, is it new? Well, no, trade wars and trade tensions are not new at all. I mean, 200 years ago in the UK, you had one of the first examples of tariffs, taxes on imports. So no, not new. But there are some things that are new that make this quite an important challenge, I think. Trade tensions have always been an issue. Protectionism has always been a problem. But what is definitely new and really difficult for businesses, I argue, is disintegration in the way we're seeing it with Brexit. So I'm not going to say that we've never had disintegration in some form before. So if you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, if you look at the breakdown of colonial relationships, sure, those are disintegration, but in a different way. So Brexit is really unprecedented, presents a massive shock, not just for UK businesses, but actually businesses in other parts of the world as well. And I think that this is a massive tension. The other thing that I think is really important to remember is this front page, which I put on the slide, which is decoupling was the word of the year in 2019. So it's not that we didn't have this idea of preferring certain suppliers before, but definitely the use of the word and the kind of avoidance of using suppliers from particular countries is a big problem for businesses. So if you happen to buy the inputs for your production process from a company in, let's say, China, and you're working in the US, and now you're not allowed to do that, this is a really big problem for you to find a new supplier at a good cost. So my second challenge would be trade tensions, and for the third, I'm going to say this sounds probably the least interesting out of all of them, but if you're operating in the digital services space, I think this is a massive problem for you as a business. So the pace of change, there needs to be a kind of symmetry in the regulations for businesses in areas, and also how quickly things are moving forward. And in the area of trade in goods, we've got quite a lot of rules in place and also quite a lot of agreements to kind of keep trade barriers quite low. But in the area of trade and services, we've not really managed to make these changes to limit the barriers to trade and services. And so there's really a lot of different practices emerging. So what we would hope to see is that there are agreements to regulate things that actually bring down the barriers. So if you're a company working in the digital services space, that might actually help you, that the fact that you know what you're going to have to pay in tax, for example. But what's actually happened is you're now expecting there's going to be a new agreement on digital services tax, which is going to make it more expensive to operate, and that builds uncertainty for you. You don't know what that agreement is going to be. So digital services tax is a big issue. The other thing is that you might be considering expanding your business more generally overseas, and more countries are using investment screening mechanisms. I take the example of the European Union mechanism, maybe just as a case, where this has been introduced by the majority of member states now. I wouldn't suggest that it's particularly effective at the moment, but definitely it's a concern if you're thinking about making investments in Europe, because you think there are more hurdles, you might get stopped making these investments. So the emergence, this screening of foreign investment, this scrutiny over foreign investment is a concern for businesses. And lastly, all of this is really happening, all of this regulation feels bitty and feels unconnected because the World Trade Organization isn't kind of offering this opportunity to bring everything together and to organize everything, because it hasn't been very well functioning recently. So that's the World Trade Organization really helps in the trade and goods space, but it's not really helping for companies working in the service sector. So those are my three challenges. I feel I haven't ordered them to say that the first was the most important, but I think these are three major challenges facing businesses. And I'm now going to hand over to Helen, who's going to try and persuade you that her three challenges are in fact the most important for businesses.
Good morning. My name is Helen Solomon. I specialize in economic growth and development, as well as financial markets, in particular the banking sector. And today I'm going to talk to you about three financial challenges facing businesses today. Could you change the slide, please, Joe? So the first challenge is uncertainty to global recovery. That means that there are risks to global economic growth, making it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. So if we have risk to global economic growth, that brings risk to economic growth of individual countries, that brings risk to business expansion. So let's take a look at the factors that are increasing risks to global economic growth. So the first factor is the pandemic. So the pandemic caused negative growth around the world. And according to the World Bank, if you look at picture A, for example, global economic growth is expected to be 2%, and this figure is below global economic growth before the pandemic. There are other risks which makes it difficult for businesses to plan for the future, and because of this, there is negative business confidence. The first one are, the new strains of coronavirus. So the coronavirus has hampered a lot of business activity, making it difficult for businesses, to plan ahead because they have not been able to operate according to normal levels. The other one is higher trade cost. So there's been an increase in the cost of shipping, in the cost of transportation, increasing the cost of business operations for business. And also there is the risk of rising inflation. And this is due to supply shortages and also a higher oil and gas prices. So all these higher costs increase the cost of doing business, which have a negative impact on business expansion. Next slide, please, Joe. The second challenge is financial distress. And this means that many companies, especially small and medium enterprises, are in danger of closing down because they have not been able to make profits. So as a result of the pandemic, we had lockdown. So either many businesses were not able to operate at all, or were able to operate but only at a decreased capacity. And even though, particularly, for example, in the UK, where government stepped in to support businesses so that they would not have to sack, their workers and continue operation, the fact of the matter is because they have not been able to operate according to normal levels, they have not made a lot of profit. In fact, a report by the Financial Times said that the risk of businesses closing down as a result of bankruptcy has increased by 15% compared to businesses, the situation in 2014. And so research shows that as a result of financial distress, because many companies have not made a lot of profit, but then they have incurred a lot of debt by getting loans from banks in order to continue operations, there is a higher risk that many banks and many businesses will become bankrupt as a result of rising company debts. My final challenge is financial stability. So if you look at the picture here, you see the Global Financial Conditions Index. And what this tells us is that as a result of an increase in inflation, central banks are thinking of raising interest rates in order to fight inflation. And the risk of raising interest rates means that the cost of borrowing for investment is higher, which means that businesses will decrease investments, and also they may decrease the amount of people they employ, meaning that there is a risk of higher unemployment. The other risk to financial stability is the risk of debt sustainability. What does that mean? Well, that means that many governments have stepped in to support businesses, to support their economy in order to mitigate the effects of the global pandemic. As a result, many countries have high debt, and when a debt rises too high, creditors and investors become very concerned about the country's ability to repay debt. And therefore, this might lead to a decrease in investment in that country as capital begins to flow out of that country into other economies because investors don't like risk. The other factor is the risk from climate change. So we have all heard on the news about these extreme weather events from floodings and fires, etc., which means that, people are now looking for, assets that take into account the effects of climate change. Now, if we have a high demand for green assets, and this demand is more than what the financial sector can cope with because it is so unexpected, this can cause problems in the financial system and a risk to financial stability. And finally, we have the threat from crypto assets. So these are digital assets that are used for financial transactions. And the problem with crypto assets is that they can destabilize capital flows, creating, risks to financial stability and plunge an economy in a financial crisis. Thank you very much for listening.
And hello, thank you very much, Helen and Karen, because I feel that all your points have been a perfect introduction to some of the points that I would like to highlight today with you. And since I understand there's going to be a vote at the end of this process, I would like to actually say that although there is an overlap in some of these issues, I actually believe that it is extremely important nowadays to be able, as managers, as global traders, as people who are involved in the business in any capacity, it is absolutely important to understand the challenges that the social systems, the ecological systems, and the global economic systems are facing today. So in the next slide, you will see that I would like to start approaching global challenges from what we would address as the global uncertainty perspective. Ulrich Beck, a sociologist, many years ago, he wrote a book where he said that society is going to be a risk-based system. He predicted that this would happen by 2020, and I think he was absolutely right. Ulrich Beck also argued that our ability to understand, to handle, to mitigate risk, but also to be able to live with risk is going to be an inherent ability that societies should actually build. We live in a VUCA world. Joseph mentioned this at the very beginning of this session, which means that it is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and very ambiguous global system. Now, the problem is not just that we have to live with risks, but actually we are observing an increased escalation of crises in the last 20 years. And I think I don't need to further elaborate on this because we are now living in a pandemic context. We know what it means to experience a global crisis on different levels: societal, health, economic, and social as well. We also understand that even the financial systems have become relatively unstable in the last 20 years. There was a fantastic diagram by Ellen showing, all this turbulence in the global markets in the last 20 years. And we now know that we should be expecting financial crises like earthquakes in Japan or in Los Angeles nowadays. 2001, the tech bubble bursting in the United States. 2008, the global meltdown. The pandemic now causing another big economic instability situation on a global scale. So what does this mean for us? That means that we have to actually understand that crises now are becoming a big part of our life. So in terms of global trade, in terms of predictions, in terms of building business plans, in terms of looking at our own involvement in this business system, we have to understand that we need to see crises as an integral part of the global systems. That is actually something that many people believe. It highlights the weaknesses of capitalism. Fukuyama wrote this fantastic theory about the end of capitalism and how capitalism is going to be marked by all those continuous crises. But what does it mean? What does this mean for organizations and for you as people who are or will be involved in business, in global trade? It means that we have to be more agile, more adaptive. It means that we need to strengthen our crisis and risk management skills. That means that actually that we have to be aware that our agility and our resilience, which means our ability to also absorb all those events, is absolutely critical. And we actually see that organizations that embrace uncertainty and make this part of their, let's say, systems, actually, they do a lot better, not only during crisis, but also during normal times. So organizations and their processes must adapt to constantly changing and uncertain conditions. I believe this is a big challenge because it is not just that we are going to analyze a problem and solve it. We have to build some different capabilities, which I believe, by the way, that in order to better understand them, we need to find ourselves in practice. We need to be engaged in the real business working environment, which is precisely why this particular course actually incorporates a practice-based module and engagement with real businesses as part of the structure of it. But the next challenge also, I think it's equally important. Karen gave me a fantastic introduction into the 8th challenge. Joseph, we can move on the slide, I believe. Thank you. Which is what I would frame as the crisis of globalization. Karen was absolutely right to say that there are many different incidents or events that highlight that the world is facing a different, let's say, perspective. For example, Trump starting a war on China, Brexit being one of those situations where we are reversing integration, in this case in Europe, and we have many other examples on a global scale. But I would like to highlight that all those events actually should be seen as a big crisis of globalization itself. I think that this crisis has been very well highlighted in many theories. I particularly like the point made by Hirsten Thompson, who actually say that globalization is just an illusion. Globalization, they argue, seems to be the reality in today's world because we all can move freely from one country to the other. We can book tickets and go to all the countries of the world, maybe except North Korea. We can actually engage with global trade relations and build business plans which can expand on a global scale. But they say be careful because this is heavily depending on political decisions. Hirsten Thompson, they argue that all these realities, these exciting global economic and global trade realities, rely heavily on governmental decisions. So what's going to happen in a world where Donald Trump is the president of the United States and Bolsonaro, who argues that the Brazilian economy needs to go back to its origins? What happens in governments who actually believe that more concentration, less integration, and a more, let's say, national focused economic perspective is to be applied? We will see, they argued, they predicted, and they were absolutely right, that the globalization trends can be very easily reversed. But also some other arguments are coming from those comparative sociologists who said that, well, we talk about globalization as if it is a given reality. We like to believe, for example, that if we have to engage with global trade relations, in different countries, every system, every organization, even every individual embrace, understand, and incorporate the same ideas, the same notions, or even the same terminology and culture. And they argue that this is not the case because the capitalist system from the outside, it looks like a fantastic homogeneous system where everyone shares a common view and ideology, but in reality, we live in different economies. And I would certainly argue that one of the biggest challenges is that, well, when you have to do business, for example, in Asia or, well, in the country where I'm coming from, Greece, you will find that many things can be extremely different. There are many what we call institutional changes. So a big challenge nowadays, it used to be, and I think it's going to be further important and critical, is our ability to engage in a global system which has a lot of local differences, in a global system where maybe there are specific processes which are globalized, but there are many certain institutional changes which are still very much dominant. Think about the education system, the banking system, the cultural aspects. Think about other simpler things like language or how you need to behave, when you make transactions with companies in another country. So there is, I would argue, a multifaceted crisis when it comes to globalization, because ethnocentrism, that means the idea that nations now, they want to go back to centralize their economies, is evident, because globalization is certainly a reality which is not necessarily the reality of the future, and because there are many local differences. I think one of the challenges that we would love to discuss with people, and it has been discussed quite heavily, is how will the world be and global trade is going to be, and the global economy is going to be, without this strong globalization trends that we have seen for the last 70 years. I think this is a very gloomy, maybe a very pessimistic question, but I think it's a very interesting question to ask. I mean, it's like trying to put ourselves in an imaginary world where we don't now have the ability to freely engage with global transactions in different countries. That's a big question. That is a big challenge. But finally, I have to say that I'm absolutely certain this is going to be the winner challenge. Yes, probably, or at least I'm hoping so. We are facing challenges coming from the ecological point of view. And I believe that there is this particular challenge is actually crossing horizontally many different aspects of social and economic life. I was reading a fantastic article in The Economist the other day about how the economists, they like to see that things are organized like they used to be in the post-war society. for example, that economics are depending, on all the numbers and issues that Helen very, very nicely presented to you. But now we are facing a completely different challenge, which is the need to save the planet. We are now having a global ecological agenda that is embraced by many countries. And very recently, for example, in Glasgow, in the international conference, decisions have been made in order to save the planet, in order to at least do something to improve a very, very bad situation, which affects how we use our natural resources and how we destroy the environment. This particular agenda has ripple effects and important critical consequences in various other domains of social life. For example, in terms of how the shipping industry is organized, the different provisions that need to be taken in many countries, like, for example, in China or India, regarding the production of goods, and they will have a detrimental effect on how we organize our economic life. It is true, it's not a theory, it's going to happen, for example, that in many parts of China, factories will be obliged to shut down for many hours during the day. In fact, there will be electricity cuts in order to make sure that this happens, because their productivity needs to be reduced, because they need to reduce their environmental imprint and impact as a country. But also this is going to happen in Europe as well. And we also see a lot of different challenges coming from the new ethical society ideology. Electric cars, for example, is going to be a new reality, which is going again to dominate the transportation realities of the future, but will also have a big impact in energy, in the energy sector, in the transportation sector, in many, many different categories of our economic life. So we may see disruption. We're going to face challenges. We may see, for example, that critical capabilities or critical resources may be affected, and we may live in a different world again, which will have to embrace all those new realities and all those new principles. And I believe that, and I strongly believe that in the same way that, for example, the shipping industry saw a big revolution 30 years ago in order to completely review the safety standards and the principles, in order to completely review, for example, how the marine pollution is going to be reduced. All the sectors of the economy will see a very, very similar revolution happening in the years to come. And that's something that we need to, again, to understand as a challenge, maybe an exciting challenge. Maybe some of you will agree that this is something that needs to happen, but still it's going to challenge the economic and systems on a global and local scale. And thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, panel. I think we can now open it up to the audience with this Q&A session. Did we want to start by running the poll with the audience?
Yeah, let's have a winner. Okay,
let's see. So I'm just going to share the poll now. You'll have about 30 seconds to respond, and it's a vote on which challenge do you think is the most pressing or important. And the question is, which of the 9 global challenges covered here do you think is the most serious from a business perspective? So I'm going to launch the poll, so please vote now.
I guess we could start with some questions while people are voting, perhaps.
Yes, we did have 2 questions from the audience. One for you, Karen. It's more of a history question, I suppose. You said that Brexit is different from other disintegrations like that of the Soviet Union. In what way is it different?
I think this is a great question. I think you could write a very interesting bit of research on this. Why is it different? Okay, so different in many ways. Of course, there are similarities. I think that the main issue is that there was this desire to exit from the EU on the basis of signing new deals with other countries, and that this would in some sense replace the lost trade from the EU. I think that is completely different from the other examples of disintegration that we might find. So I think that now, whether everybody who voted for Brexit believed that that was a good rationale is a different thing, but I think that was definitely part of the rationale that was put out there by the government, was that we were going to have this freedom to sign new trade deals with all these other countries, which of course largely goes against what economists believe, which is that you tend to trade more with countries that are closer to you, and therefore the premise of all this was that we were going to be able to, trade more with countries that in some cases were very far, Australia, New Zealand, etc. So I think the premise of Brexit is completely new. I think the rationale for why we would want to do this is totally new. Although I think this kind of mixture of political and economic rationale is always underpinning lots of these kinds of decisions. And I would accept that almost all decisions on the international trade front tend to be actually quite political. So I'm sure you can find commonalities with the examples of, the breakdown of colonial relationships or the breakdown in the Soviet Union. And certainly there was a great deal of pain for businesses, operating with when those breakdowns of these relationships occurred. But I do think there is something distinct here. But I think it's a great question and something worth actually probably more time than I've given it an answer today.
Can I add to this as well? I believe that the dynamics have been a bit different because the collapse of the Soviet Union system as a different, let's say, economic system was about integration. It was about the desire, if you like, to exit from one system and enter into another reality, which, by the way, it was seen as better or not better. I'm not going to comment on this because this is very political. The Brexit is a bit different because it's actually about exiting a system without having a clear view about what we want. It shows the dissatisfaction from people from the current economic situation. It shows again how they live with crisis. They have to embrace risk. They don't like risk. They don't like this uncertainty in the environment. And they express it by saying, let's get out of the EU. And let's go where? I mean, there is no next day, if you like, to this particular kind of thinking. I think it goes back again to what we talked about, the reverse of globalization as a societal trend, which cannot necessarily be very well explained yet. Yes, Boris Johnson promised 350 million pounds per week, but I don't think it's just this calculation that mattered. I think it's this, let's say, desire to, or this anxiety, which is expressed through Brexit or many other choices and many other, let's say, referendums that took place in the last 10 years on a global scale. So I believe it's a matter of hope. I think there was more hope and there is much less, let's say, clarity about what Brexit is about still. I think that's a big difference, but that, I don't know, probably yes.
I think that's a really good point, Notice. I think, I think it was certainly much clearer whether people disagreed with the process of, the collapse of the Soviet Union at the time. I think at least the underpinning rationale and what was going to be the change that occurred was clearer to some extent. I think you're absolutely right. And I think there was this great confusion on the part of people even at the time when they voted for Brexit about what this really meant.
Thank you, Nodes and Karen. I'm about to close the poll, so voting has now closed, and I can announce the result. It's a draw, actually. So between number 1, supply chains, and number 7, global uncertainty and the risk society. So those were voted by our audience as being the most serious challenges facing business at a global scale. Okay. So yeah, I think I can move on to another question now. So I've got a question here from a member of the audience who asked, what is ethnocentrism? Now, I know you touched on it in your talk, Nodes, but could you give us a short definition?
It's the political ideology and the economic ideology as well that says that we can do everything inside our country. So it's about looking at the world as a world which can depend on our national resources, national economic capabilities, and national coordinated systems. So, for example, very recently, the government of Poland, they said that the ethnocentric vision that they have is to make Poland an independent state. Because obviously they feel that the EU is reducing their legislative capacity and their ability to handle matters the way they want. So the ethnocentric ideology is about putting the nation at the center of the ideology and try to become independent without all this, let's say, local and international dependencies. Because again, we can see global trade both as a great opportunity to operate on a global scale, but also as a threat. And I guess this is the balance that has been ongoing for the last 70 years. And we now feel that the ethnocentric view, which is our nation is more important than the global system, is now getting traction on a global scale. And that's why we present it as a challenge.
Thank you so much, Nodes. Okay, so we've got one more question from the Q&A, and then I'll invite you each to give your closing remarks, and then I'll give a short presentation on the course itself and what you can expect to achieve by studying on this program. And so the final question is, when examining the climate impact on business, what do you think will be the biggest specific challenge facing businesses in the next 10 years? For example, increasing environmental legislation or changing consumer views due to sustainable practices. So I could maybe put that to first Helen and then Nodes, as I know your expertise does cover sustainability issues.
Oh, Ellen, you're muted. Sorry.
So from a finance perspective, the issue that climate change brings is that with all these extreme weather events, that, financial markets might be reluctant to invest in certain assets which businesses already have. So let me give you a very good example. Imagine that you have a flood, and a flood destroys a property, or the flood destroys a land. And on that land, you have a factory, and that factory is destroyed from the flood. Now, imagine that factory, the company has taken a loan from the bank in order to, run this factory. Then as a result of this flood, banks are less likely to, provide loans to businesses, to open up factories in that area because of the environmental consequences. And this is where it can directly affect businesses, because banks don't want to make loss, and they don't want to invest in assets that will make loss. And therefore, if businesses are owning assets like property or land that are more susceptible to climate change, then they are more likely to lose, which might hamper their ability to continue and operate business. So from a financial perspective, these are the kind of risks that we think about. Not that side, perhaps you want to add
more. I think the other perspective is the regulation legislative level, which is very much important as well, because we are actually seeing new regulations in place regarding, again, transportation, fuel consumption, regarding energy, regarding the sources of energy. The carbon emissions are to be completely eliminated by 2030. There will be simpler cases, for example, like plastic straws. I enjoy my coffee in the summer, using my plastic straw, not anymore, because now we have to stop using plastic in many, many different industries. Now, again, as I said, there are ripple effects with this, because, for example, if we abandon plastic, that means that specific areas producing plastic, specific transportation companies, making sure that the plastics moves from one part of the world to the other, they will simply put, stop operating. They will see a drop in their business. There will be new businesses, of course, there will be new opportunities, but we are going to see all these big changes on many levels because of the new regulations. I also feel that the new economy of pollution, the new economy where we will be trading, if you like, for gas emission, for example, points, is going to be a new economy which is again, it's going to provide additional challenges for companies. You probably know that already airlines are facing this very, very big problem. You know, they have to reduce the gas emissions. So I believe that on the regulatory level, we will see quite many challenges which companies they will have to absorb, interpret, and they will have to change not their tactics. I believe they will have to change their strategies in order to be able to cope with all these regulatory changes. And if you feel that you are safe from this, don't. Even banking these days, as you probably know, it needs to apply ESG frameworks. They need to actually make sure that they invest in environmentally friendly companies, and they have to engage with ethical investments. So I don't think there is any sector which is not going to be affected. And in that sense, the global trade relations, which to some extent depend on those primary manufacturing production sectors, they will be heavily influenced. We have to wait and see how and in what way.
Yeah, absolutely. Climate change is a global problem, and no sector and no part of the world is going to be immune to it.
And also, if I can add a little bit as well, because Freddie mentioned the role of changing consumer views due to sustainable practices, and that is absolutely right. And this is how we can affect business, because many businesses own a variety or invest in a variety of assets in order to raise working capital. So they could have bonds, they can have stocks, and they use this as working capital, to run their business. Now, if most of these assets they're not green assets. And so if as consumers place a heavier weight on sustainable practices, they are more likely to demand green assets. And if they're more likely to demand green assets, it means that the non-green assets that companies own are not worth very much. And this could actually affect their working capital and their ability to access the capital to do business. And so I guess what this means is that over time, we may be able to see a change towards, companies, having more green assets in their portfolio in order to communicate that they care about the environment.
Thank you, Helen. And for the closing remarks, I've had one final question through from the audience. Just to conclude this Q&A section before we move on to talk about the course, the Global Trade and Business BA. So one member of the audience participant has asked, do you support ethnocentrism or globalization? I suppose another way of framing that would be to say, do you support economic integration or disintegration? So yeah, a short answer from each of our panelists. And
I don't like Donald Trump. That's
maybe I can quite clearly say that I think integration overall, although of course we have to qualify it, but a short answer would be I'm pro-integration.
My short answer would be I'm also for economic integration, as we have seen from the benefits of globalization.
Thank you, panel. I'll now move on to give you a brief overview of the Global Trade and Business course, and I'll bring in my academic colleagues where there's something related to the academic or the teaching side of things, but I'll give you information about the course and how to apply. So first of all, it's a one-year course, equivalent to the final year of a BA degree, and you need to have achieved a level 5 qualification in business and management to gain admission onto the program. And I'll give you a more detailed, the entrance criteria in more detail later on in this presentation. And the course, as we'll find out, includes an international work experience visit. Now, the BA Global Trade and Business is very much a level 6 top-up course. Now, level 6, as you may know, is just another term for the third year or the final year of your 3-year BA or bachelor degree studies. You may also take a BSc as well, but this is a BA degree. So it's very much, you need to have done some university level study already, but I can go into more detail about that later on. So yeah, I wondered if one of our panelists could tell us a bit more about the work experience component of this one-year course?
Yeah, no,
Yep.
Joe, I'll be happy to take that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the modules that we have in our global trade and business is professional experience. And what happens is that within this module, you get to work with an international organization to complete a project. And so what happens is that, you know, the lectures and seminars and the workshops within this professional experience module prepare you for the project and for the visit abroad with this organization. So you're going to travel abroad and collaborate with an organization in order to do a project. Now, the cost of traveling abroad is included in the fee, so you don't have to pay anything extra. And the costs include, you know, flights, you know, to the destination, coach transfers, you know, 5 nights stay in a 3-star hotel. You know, it pays for company visits, it pays for evening meals, and as well as conference facilities and presentations. And Nodas is going to be taking the professional experience module.
Yeah, and I would like to add that the whole module is organized around also company visits. So the logic is to be exposed to the real, let's say, economic and business life. So you will have to engage with the real economic and global trade problem. You will be acting as investigators. You will have to actually engage with I won't say a realistic environment, but actually with the real economic environment, and you will get to meet people who actually have the first-hand experience and view of things in an organizational or an international organization's setting. And I also feel, again, from experience, I have to share this because previously at Westminster, we have done many times this. We have approached modules and courses from this experience perspective. This week abroad also gives you a different perspective, because we are all fully dedicated into our mission. We have the opportunity to discuss things. This is a very important part of the course, and which usually also students enjoy quite a lot as well.
Thank you so much. And this gives you an idea of the structure. So you'll have studied to level 5 or equivalent, and then you'll join the program. And as a one-year course, there'll be 3 modules in each semester, including in semester 2, the professional experience module, which is an assessed part of your degree. It's not just an internship. It's not just a work placement. It will be there'll be a project attached to it, and it will be an assessed part of your study on this BA course. And yeah, so this is just to give you an idea of the program structure and the modules that make up the program. And yeah, this is an idea of the teaching methods that we use. So it's very much combining theory with practice. So it's your usual seminars as well as workshops. And during the pandemic, we very much adapted to blended learning. So you may have been taught using these methods before, but these are very much the teaching methods we employ on the program. And now to come to some admissions information, and I may need to bring in the course leaders' perspective on this as well. So this just gives you a general idea of the types of qualification that you should have previously studied to gain entry onto the program. Now, this isn't comprehensive, but this just gives you a general idea: an HND diploma, a foundation degree, and something with the grade equivalency of a UK NQF level 5 qualification. And I think if you'd studied 2 years of an undergraduate degree, that may qualify you as well. And also, if you're an international student, here are the IELTS or the English language requirements. And just finally, how to apply is, yeah, visit our course page using the vanity URL here. And if you're applying through a partner, because many of our students who join us at level 6 join us through our international partner institutions, please contact this address here, Partner Admissions. And I suppose a question to ask of the panel is, would you admit students onto the program who don't have a business and management academic background, say someone who'd studied a humanities degree or a social sciences degree? Would that be a degree in a relevant subject area? So,
in order to be admitted into the global trade and business, you would need to have achieve the equivalent of a recognized qualification level 5 in business. So if you can go back to that slide, Joe, the slide about the admissions criteria. So we're looking at a situation where you either have achieved, an advanced diploma, an SQA advanced diploma, or you've achieved, the equivalent of a BTech HND diploma in business. And so there are other subject pathways that are related to business. And then you have the English language qualification as well, which is the IELTS score of at least 6. If your qualifications are slightly outside that, they would need to be assessed by myself, the course leader, to see that you actually meet the required learning outcomes of the Global Trade and Business Program.
Thank you, Helen. And if you have any further questions, please contact any of us. You can contact Partner Admissions, and all our academics contact details are in the public domain on our staff directory on the University of Westminster website. Should you wish to ask Helen or Karen or Nodas a question about the course, and Partner Admissions if you're applying for a partner. And please, visit the course page to find out more. And any questions you had about the application process or studying at Westminster, moving to London, please contact our course inquiries desk. I think we can bring things to a close now. We've just had a message in the chat box from one of our participants saying, "Thank you, everyone. That was a really stimulating and interesting debate." And I completely agree with that. So thank you, panel. Before we draw things to a close, would you give any final words of motivation to students who want to join this program next year?
Shall I say a couple of words and then you can say something, Ellen? I mean, I guess I would say that I think we designed this program very much because it's over time, where I think these issues around the intersection between international trade and the way that businesses operate is critically important at the moment. There are relatively few courses in this space, so I think what we offer is quite interesting. And I think what we've discussed around the work placement is quite unusual for a course of this type. But also, even when you're studying in the classroom, we make every effort to make sure that all of the teaching is relevant to what you will see in the workplace. So in the context of the international trade module, you would be actually given a task which is authentic in a sense. So the one this year was looking at, if you are to propose a country that the UK government should sign a trade deal with, which would it be? That was the task students were given on the module this year. So don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions about the trade side, and maybe Nodas, I don't know, Helen, if you have any final words.
Yeah, I think it's a great place. University of Westminster is a great place to study BA Global Trade and Business because we have great industrial links. You're coming to London, which is the center of, finance and economic financial activity. You get to gain valuable work experience, which you can put on your CV, which is a great bonus with this program. And, studying here at the university is a great place of social and cultural exchange because you will be meeting students from all over the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, very similar message from me as well. I believe that it's about choosing what you want to do in terms of content. And I think this is a great subject with a lot of links, if you like, with the real economy, and lots of employment opportunities as well out there. Second, for a program like this, a metropolis site like London is absolutely ideal. And I also feel that something that we need also to put always in the agenda is you need to choose an exciting program, something that excites you, something that which you are going to enjoy, something that the course leaders and the people teaching you are also enjoying as well. And I feel this is the kind of space, this particular course. So let's enjoy yourselves.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, panel. And just to say thank you to everyone who joined us today, to our audience and prospective students, and for your participation today. Okay, and we look forward to welcoming you to Westminster Business School and the University of Westminster next September. So take care, everyone, and stay safe.